My mother lied to me for 17 years. She told me my grandparents had died before I was born. Both of them gone, she said, swept away by time before I ever drew my first breath. She spoke of them with such quiet finality, such gentle sadness that I never questioned her words, never pushed for photographs, never asked to visit their graves, never wondered why there were no letters, no heirlooms, no stories passed down through generations the way other families preserve their histories. I believed her completely. And on that Tuesday morning in March, a single phone call shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother and myself. I still remember the taste of that morning. Burnt coffee from the old percolator that had belonged to my mother, the one she'd used every single day for as long as I could remember. The machine sat on the counter like a relic from another era, chrome and glass and stubborn reliability. She had loved that percolator, said it made coffee the way coffee was supposed to taste. Now I kept it running because the sound of it gurgling to life each morning was the closest thing I had to hearing her voice. 6 months. 6 months since my mother closed her eyes for the last time in that hospital bed with the thin sheets and the machines that beeped until they didn't. 6 months since I held her hand and felt the warmth slowly leave her fingers. 6 months since the world lost its color and everything became muted, distant, like watching my own life through frosted glass. I thought I had gotten used to the emptiness by now, the hollow space in my chest where her voice used to live, the silence at breakfast where her humming used to fill our small Chicago apartment, the way I still reach for the phone to call her when something happened good or bad, before remembering there was no one on the other end anymore. My name is Sable Westcott. I was 17 years old that March morning, and I believed I knew everything about my family. I believed my mother had told me the truth about where I came from. I believed I was alone in the world, except for Clyde, my stepfather, who sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on his phone, with the distracted air of a man who had stopped expecting anything good to happen. The kitchen was small, cramped really. A window over the sink that looked out at the brick wall of the building next door. Cabinets that didn't quite close all the way. Linoleum floor that had started peeling in the corners years ago and would never be fixed. This was the apartment my mother had brought me home to when I was born. The only home I had ever known. The toast I'd made sat untouched on my plate. Dry bread I could barely swallow, each bite sticking in my throat like sawdust. Grief does strange things to appetite. Some days I forgot to eat entirely. Other days I couldn't stop filling the emptiness with whatever was in the refrigerator. This was a forgetting day. The toast was just something to look at while the morning stretched on. The phone rang at exactly 10:14. I know the precise time because I was staring at the clock above the stove, the one with the second hand that clicked too loudly, counting the minutes until I could escape to school and pretend my life was normal. Pretend I was just another 17-year-old worried about grades and friends and the future. Pretend I had not spent every night for 6 months crying into a pillow that still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. Jasmine and vanilla, her signature scent. I couldn't bring myself to wash the pillowcase, even though the smell was fading now, becoming more memory than reality. Clyde answered the phone. He always answered the phone in those days, as if screening my calls was part of his unspoken duty as the remaining adult in my life. His voice changed as he listened, changed from the flat annoyance of a man interrupted to something else. Confusion first, his brow furrowing, then a strange expression I couldn't quite identify. He looked at me differently, like he was seeing me for the first time, like I had suddenly become someone else. "It's for you," he said, holding out the phone like it might bite him. "Some lawyer from Montana." Montana. The word meant nothing to me. I had never been to Montana. I didn't know anyone in Montana. My mother had never mentioned Montana. Not once in 17 years of bedtime stories and car ride conversations and lazy Sunday mornings when she would braid my hair and tell me about her childhood. She talked about growing up in a small town, about fields of wheat and big skies and a house with a porch swing. But she'd never named the place, never gave me coordinates I could locate on a map, never left breadcrumbs that might lead me back to wherever she'd come from, except she hadn't told me the truth about her childhood, had she? She had told me lies wrapped in love, and I had believed every single one. I took the phone from Clyde's outstretched hand. The receiver was warm from his grip, slightly greasy from the lotion he used on his perpetually dry skin. I pressed it to my ear and waited. "Is this Sable Westcott?" The voice on the other end was old careful, like someone reading words they had rehearsed many times before making this call. "Daughter of Corinne Westcott, formerly Corinne Whitfield." "Yes, sir," I said, and my voice cracked on the second word. My mother had been gone for 6 months, but hearing her name still felt like a knife sliding between my ribs, still felt like the floor dropping out from beneath my feet, still felt like drowning in broad daylight while everyone around me breathed normally. "My name is Leland Thatcher. I'm an attorney in Ridgewood, Montana. I'm calling about your grandmother, Opal Whitfield." He paused. In that pause, I felt the world shift beneath my feet. The kitchen floor seemed to tilt the morning light through the window, changing color, the hum of the refrigerator growing distant. Everything I thought I knew about my life began to crack and crumble like old plaster, falling away to reveal something hidden beneath. I'm afraid she passed away 6 days ago. Heart failure, according to the doctors. The funeral was yesterday. I apologize for not reaching you sooner, but finding your contact information took some time. Grandmother. The word echoed in my skull like a stone dropped down a deep well, falling and falling through darkness, waiting for the splash that would tell me how deep the water went, how deep the lies went, how much of my history had been hidden from me. My mother had told me her parents were dead, both of them, gone before I was born. She'd said it with such finality, such quiet sadness that I'd accepted it as immutable fact. The sky is blue, water is wet, your grandparents are dead. These were the truths of my childhood, unquestionable and absolute. Now I stood in Clyde's kitchen with a dead phone pressed against my ear, and the realization that my mother had lied to me for my entire life. "Miss Westcott, are you still there?" "I'm here." I managed. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow. Distant. "Your grandmother left everything to you. The house, the land, 80 acres in total. She named you specifically in her will, updated it just 3 months ago." Another pause weighted with meaning. "She knew exactly who you were, Miss Westcott. She had been looking for you for a very long time. Looking for me. My grandmother had been looking for me. A woman I'd been told was dead had been searching for me, tracking me down, updating her will to include me just months before her death. She had known I existed. She had wanted to find me. And my mother had kept us apart for 17 years. Why? What could possibly justify that kind of deception? What secret was so terrible that my mother had chosen to erase her own parents from existence rather than let me know them? Miss Westcott, there are some details we should discuss in person. About the property, about your grandmother's wishes, about some complications that may arise. Would you be able to travel to Ridgewood in the next few days? I said yes. I said yes without thinking, without consulting Clyde, without considering the logistics of traveling halfway across the country during the school semester. I said yes because the alternative was staying in this cramped apartment with its peeling linoleum and its ghosts, wondering forever what my mother had hidden from me and why. Have you ever received news that made you question everything you thought you knew? News that cracked open your past like an egg revealing something raw and unknown inside. That phone call did that to me. It split my life into before and after. Before, when I was Sable Westcott orphan alone in the world, except for a stepfather I barely knew. After, when I was someone else entirely. Someone with a history I had never been told. Someone with roots I had never known existed. And what I would discover in Montana would change my life in ways I never could have imagined. Clyde drove me to Ridgewood 3 days later. He wanted to handle the paperwork quickly, sell the property, return to our quiet, careful life in Chicago, where nothing unexpected ever happened, and the days blurred together in a gray procession of sameness. He had already done the research on his phone, scrolling through real estate listings and property values while we waited for the funeral arrangements to be confirmed. 80 acres in rural Montana could fetch decent money, he said as we loaded the car. Enough to pay off some debts, put some away for your college fund, get us back on stable ground. I didn't respond. I just climbed into the passenger seat and stared out the window as Chicago disappeared behind us. The journey took 14 hours. 14 hours of silence and gas station coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. 14 hours of questions I couldn't ask because I didn't know where to begin. Why did my mother lie? What was she protecting me from? What secrets had she carried to her grave? The landscape changed outside the window like a movie playing in slow motion. The steel and glass of Chicago gave way to the flat expanse of the Midwest, endless fields of brown winter crops, stretching to horizons I couldn't see in the city. Then slowly, gradually, the terrain transformed into something else entirely. Rolling hills appeared, then pine forests, then mountains in the distance, with their peaks still white with late-season snow. I had never seen mountains before. Not real ones, anyway. Just pictures in books and images on screens. Now they rose before me like sleeping giants, ancient and eternal. Their presence filling the windshield with a majesty that made my breath catch in my throat. 6 hours into the drive, we turned off the interstate onto a 2-lane highway. The pavement grew rougher, cracked and patched from years of harsh winters. An hour later, we turned onto a county road with no center line, then onto a gravel path that wound through fields of golden grass, swaying in the wind like waves on a landlocked ocean. The landscape was beautiful, so beautiful it made my chest ache with something I couldn't name. So vast and open and wild, so different from everything I'd ever known. The sky here wasn't a strip of blue glimpsed between buildings. It was everywhere, enormous and endless, pressing down on the earth with the weight of infinite possibility. This was where my mother had come from. This was the world she had left behind. These fields, these mountains, this endless sky. She had traded all of this for a cramped apartment in Chicago, with its noise and its crowds, and its complete absence of horizon. She had given up this beauty for a life of concrete and chaos. Why? What could have driven her away from a place like this? And then I saw it. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long driveway lined by ancient oak trees. Their branches stretched over the road like a living tunnel, creating a cathedral of green and gold, where afternoon light filtered through the leaves in shifting patterns. The trees had stood sentinel here for a century, maybe longer, watching generations come and go, keeping their silent vigil over the land. The house itself was a Victorian structure, 2 stories tall with a wraparound porch and tall windows that reflected the afternoon sun like watchful eyes. At first glance, it looked abandoned. The white paint was peeling in places, curling away from the wood like old skin. The porch sagged on the left side where a support beam had given way to time and weather. One of the upstairs windows was boarded shut with plywood that had weathered to gray. But beneath the decay, I could see something solid, something stubborn and enduring, like an old woman who refused to sit down even when her legs ached, who kept standing out of pure determination. The bones of this house were good. They had held for 100 years, and they would hold for 100 more if someone cared enough to try. In the front yard, a massive weeping willow had died. Nothing remained but a jagged stump, gray and weathered by decades of Montana winters. It sat in the grass like a grave marker for something beautiful that used to be, something that had been loved and lost and mourned. I would later learn that my mother had loved that tree, that she had sat beneath its branches on summer afternoons reading books and dreaming of the future, that she had buried something important beneath its roots before she left this place forever. But I didn't know any of that yet. I stepped out of the car and the silence hit me like a physical force. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls, no rumble of the subway beneath my feet, no white noise of civilization that I had grown so accustomed to I'd forgotten it existed. Just the wind moving through the tall grass, and somewhere far away the cry of a hawk circling in the endless blue sky. The silence was so complete it felt like a sound itself, a presence, a living thing that wrapped around me and held me still. "Let's make this quick," Clyde said behind me, already checking his phone for signal. The lawyer said he'd meet us here at 4, but I wasn't listening. I was walking toward the house, my feet moving without permission, drawn by something deep and ancient. Some invisible thread connecting my heart to this place I had never seen before. Each step felt significant, weighted with meaning I couldn't understand. The gravel crunched beneath my sneakers. The wind caught my hair. The sun warmed my face. When I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaned under my weight, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Not fear. Something else. Something that felt almost like recognition. Almost like coming home. What is it about certain places that call to us, that speak to something deep in our bones, deeper than memory, deeper than thought? Standing on that porch, for the first time, I felt my whole body resonate like a tuning fork, struck against something true. Like I had been waiting my entire life to stand exactly here, in exactly this spot, even though I hadn't known this place existed until 3 days ago. My mother had stood on this porch, as a child, as a teenager, as a young woman making the choice to leave and never return. Her feet had worn these boards. Her hand had touched this railing. Her eyes had watched the sun set behind those distant mountains. I could feel her here, faintly, like perfume lingering in an empty room. A car appeared on the gravel road, trailing a cloud of dust that rose and drifted in the afternoon light. Leland Thatcher arrived at exactly 4 o'clock, driving a mud-splattered pickup truck that looked older than he was. He was a small man, thin and weathered, with nervous eyes and a suit that hung loose on his frame, as though he had lost weight recently and hadn't bothered to buy new clothes. "Sable," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that trembled slightly. "You look just like her. Your mother, I mean. Same eyes, same stubborn chin." He had known my mother. The realization hit me like cold water. This man had known Corinne Whitfield before she became Corinne Westcott, before she ran away to Chicago and built a new life and had a daughter and lied to that daughter for 17 years. He had known the person she used to be, the person I had never met. He handed me a heavy ring of old iron keys. "The house, the barn, the equipment shed, the root cellar," he said, pointing to each key in turn. "It's all yours now, free and clear except for the property taxes, which are paid through the end of the year." "What happened to her?" I asked. "My grandmother. Why did she never contact us?" Leland's eyes darted away from mine. "That's complicated, Miss Westcott. Opal was a private woman. She had her reasons." He lowered his voice, glancing at Clyde, who was still by the car, tapping at his phone with growing frustration as he searched for signal that didn't exist out here. "There are people in this town who wanted her land, wanted it badly. She was careful about who she trusted." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "Be careful yourself, Miss Westcott. Your grandmother was careful, and it still wasn't enough." Before I could ask what he meant, another car appeared on the driveway, a black SUV, sleek and expensive, completely out of place on this dusty gravel road. The kind of car that belonged in a city parking garage, not in the middle of Montana ranch country. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator approaching prey. The afternoon sun glinted off its tinted windows, hiding whoever waited inside. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair slicked back from a face that had been handsome once and still held traces of that former glory. His suit probably cost more than Clyde's car. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine despite the dust of the road. His smile was wide and white and did not reach his eyes. I noticed that immediately. The disconnect between his mouth and his gaze, like he was wearing a mask made of pleasantness with something else entirely hiding beneath. "You must be young Sable," he said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth, cultured, the kind of voice that came from expensive schools and country clubs. "Vincent Mercer. I was a friend of your grandmother's, a business associate, really. I own Mercer Development, the largest property company in the county." I shook his hand. His grip was too firm, held too long, like he was trying to establish dominance through a simple handshake. His palm was soft, uncalloused. The hand of a man who had others do his manual labor. I wanted to express my condolences personally. Vincent continued, his eyes sweeping over the property with an expression I couldn't read. Something hungry lived in that gaze, something acquisitive. Opal was a fixture of this community. She'll be missed. He paused, looking at the house with the same expression a wolf might wear while watching a wounded deer. "I also wanted to make you an offer. $300,000 cash for the property as is. You could sign the papers today, walk away tomorrow, never have to worry about this place again." $300,000. I heard Clyde's sharp intake of breath behind me. Heard him step closer, suddenly interested for the first time since we'd arrived. That was more money than he'd ever seen in his life. More money than I could comprehend at 17. Enough to solve all our problems, pay off all our debts, start fresh somewhere new. "That's very generous," Clyde said, his voice eager in a way that made me uncomfortable. Sable and I were just discussing how to handle the estate. A quick sale would certainly simplify things. But something in Vincent Mercer's smile made my stomach turn. Something hungry beneath the polish. Something that reminded me of every cautionary tale my mother had ever told me about strangers with too friendly smiles and offers that seemed too good to be true. The way his eyes kept moving over the land, calculating its value, planning what he would do with it. Like my grandmother's entire life could be erased with a signature and a check. "I need time to think about it," I said. Vincent's smile flickered. Just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, something cold flashed in his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps. Or anger. Then the warmth returned, practiced and smooth like a mask slipping back into place. Of course. Take all the time you need." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Heavy paper gold embossed letters, the kind of card that said, "I am important and you should be grateful for my attention. Though not too much time. I have other interested parties, you understand. But for Opal's granddaughter, I can wait a few days." He drove away in his expensive SUV, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the golden afternoon light. I watched until the vehicle disappeared around the bend in the road, until the sound of its engine faded into the vast Montana silence. "That's a lot of money, Sable," Clyde said quietly. "More than this place is worth, probably. We should think seriously about this." I looked at Leland Thatcher. The old lawyer was watching Mercer's SUV disappear, and his face had gone pale. His hands were trembling slightly, gripping his briefcase like a shield against something I couldn't see. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. Leland shook his head slowly. "Not here. Not now." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Just be careful, Miss Westcott. Your grandmother was careful, and it still wasn't enough." He climbed back into his pickup truck and drove away, leaving Clyde and me alone with the house and its secrets. That night I explored the house while Clyde slept on the old couch downstairs. He had wanted to drive back to Ridgewood and find a motel, wanted to sleep somewhere with running water he trusted, and walls that didn't creak with every gust of wind. But I insisted on staying. I needed to understand this place, needed to touch the walls my grandmother had touched, needed to walk the floors she had walked for 75 years. The electricity worked surprisingly. The lights flickered when I turned them on, but they held steady after a moment, casting yellow pools of illumination through rooms that felt suspended in time. The furniture was old, but well-maintained, covered in sheets that had protected it from dust, while the house waited for someone to return, and the newspapers. The house was full of newspapers, stacks of them floor to ceiling in some rooms, creating narrow pathways through the chaos. At first, I thought my grandmother had been a hoarder, that her mind had gone soft in her final years, that she had lost the ability to distinguish between treasure and trash and had simply kept everything filling her home with the detritus of decades. But as I looked closer, I realized there was a pattern. The newspapers were arranged by date, by topic. Clippings about Mercer development carefully cut and preserved in plastic sleeves. Articles about land disputes highlighted in yellow marker. Obituaries of people I didn't recognize, annotated with handwritten notes in margins. Court records and property transfers and business announcements going back 40 years. This was not garbage. This was research. My grandmother had been building a case against someone, documenting something she wanted the world to know, creating a paper trail that spanned decades, meticulous and methodical, waiting for the day when it would all make sense. In the kitchen, I found something that stopped me cold. On the table, a single clean plate sat with a knife and fork placed neatly beside it. A glass of water half full waited nearby. It looked like she had been expecting someone for dinner, like she had set the table for a guest who never arrived. And beside the plate, a piece of yellow paper. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, clearly written by someone whose hands were no longer steady. But the words were clear, stark against the paper, like a warning from beyond the grave. Don't trust the well water. I stared at the note for a long time, trying to understand. The well water I had seen an old hand pump near the barn, rusted and abandoned. But the house had modern plumbing now. A faucet, a water heater, running water from some municipal source or a newer well. Why would she warn me about the old well? What had she been trying to tell me? I was still holding the note when I heard the footsteps above my head. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Moving across the floor of the master bedroom directly above me. My heart slammed against my ribs. Clyde was asleep downstairs. I had checked on him an hour ago, seen his chest rising and falling in the dim light from the window. There was no one else in the house. No one was supposed to be in the house. I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, the same kind my mother used to use to fry chicken on Sunday afternoons back when she was still alive, and the world still made sense. The weight of it in my hand was reassuring, solid, real. I crept toward the stairs, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The stairs groaned under my weight despite my careful steps. Each creak sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to distribute my weight, trying to move without announcing my presence. I reached the landing. The door to the master bedroom was open, just a crack. A sliver of moonlight cut through the darkness. The footsteps had stopped, but I could sense someone there, waiting, listening. I pushed the door open with the skillet raised. The room was empty. but the window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the cold night wind. I hadn't opened that window. It had been closed when I'd looked through the house earlier. Closed and latched. I rushed to the window and looked down. At the edge of the cornfield, maybe 100 yards away, a figure stood in the moonlight. Dark coat, hood pulled up, face invisible in shadow, perfectly still like a statue carved from darkness itself. And then the figure raised one hand and pointed directly at me. Not a wave, not a greeting, a point, deliberate, threatening, like a promise of something terrible to come, like a warning and a threat wrapped into a single gesture. I watched frozen as the figure turned slowly and walked into the tall corn. The stalks swallowed him whole, closing behind him like the waters of a dark sea, accepting a sinking ship. I slammed the window shut and locked it, my hands unsteady on the cold metal latch. My breath came in short gasps. My pulse pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to make myself small. Invisible, safe. Who was that? What did they want? Why had they been watching me? When I turned around, my flashlight beam caught something I hadn't noticed before. A loose floorboard beside the bed. The edges were scratched, the wood scarred by recent work. Someone had pried it up recently. The scratches were fresh, the splinters still pale and new. I knelt down and worked my fingers under the edge. The board came up easily, revealing a dark space beneath. Old insulation dust, the smell of decades of neglect. And a velvet jewelry box. It was old. The fabric worn smooth by years of handling. It looked like something a grandmother would keep her wedding ring in. Something precious and secret. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was not a ring, not jewelry of any kind. It was a key. An old iron key, heavy and cold, with a piece of masking tape wrapped around the head. On the tape, written in tiny, cramped letters, were numbers, coordinates, latitude and longitude. And beneath the key, folded into a tight square, was a photograph. I unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble between my fingers. The photograph showed a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with blonde braids and a gap-toothed smile. She was standing on the porch of this very house, holding hands with an elderly woman. But the elderly woman was not my grandmother, Opal. I had seen pictures of Opal in the house, knew her face from the funeral notice Leland Thatcher had shown me. Gray hair, kind eyes, soft features. This woman was different, older, taller, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, right through time itself, directly into my soul. There was something fierce about her, something unbroken, despite her obvious age. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written Corinne and great-grandmother Josie, 1989. Corinne, my mother's name, and great-grandmother Josie, according to every story my mother had ever told me, according to every document I had ever seen. My great-grandmother Josephine Whitfield had died in 1999. 25 years ago. 5 years before I was even born. So why was my grandmother hiding a photograph of her under the floorboards like a secret that could destroy the world? I was still holding the photograph when I smelled smoke. At first I thought I was imagining it. The stress, The exhaustion, the shock of everything I had learned playing tricks on my senses. The night had already been too much. My mind was looking for more threats, more dangers, more reasons to be afraid. But then I heard Clyde shouting from downstairs, his voice sharp with panic. "Sable fire! Get down here now!" I ran to the window and saw it. The old dairy barn, the one that had stood on this property for over 100 years, was engulfed in flames. Orange light danced across the fields, casting wild shadows on the farmhouse walls. Sparks spiraled into the night sky like angry fireflies escaping into the darkness. The heat was so intense I could feel it through the glass, even from this distance. By the time we reached the yard, there was nothing we could do. The flames roared and crackled, consuming 100 years of history in hungry gulps. The wooden beams groaned and collapsed inward, sending fresh showers of sparks into the sky. The heat blistered my skin from 30 feet up. The volunteer fire department arrived 20 minutes later, but the barn was already a skeleton of blackened beams and glowing embers. 100 years of history reduced to ash in less than an hour. I stood watching the destruction. The photograph still clutched in my hand when I saw it. A black pickup truck, no headlights, pulling away down the gravel road. It moved slowly, carefully, trying not to draw attention, trying to disappear into the darkness before anyone noticed. It disappeared before I could read the license plate. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone wanted us gone. Clyde was talking to the fire chief, his voice high and nervous, already discussing insurance claims and property values. Already calculating how this affected the potential sale to Vincent Mercer. Already thinking about money instead of meaning. But I wasn't listening. I was watching the road, thinking about Vincent Mercer's smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thinking about the warning my grandmother had left on the kitchen table. Thinking about the figure in the cornfield pointing at me like a promise of violence. What else had she been trying to tell me? The fire trucks left around 3 in the morning. Clyde went back inside, muttering about finding a motel, about getting away from this cursed place. But I stayed on the porch, watching the embers glow in the darkness, unable to sleep. That was when the old pickup truck came up the driveway. It moved slowly, headlights off engine, barely whispering. For a moment, I thought it was the same truck that had fled the scene. Coming back to finish what they started. I grabbed a shovel from beside the door and held it ready. But the man who stepped out was not what I expected. He was maybe 70 with a gray beard and sun-weathered skin and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime working the earth. He wore overalls and a flannel shirt, and his eyes were the saddest I had ever seen. Deep set and blue and carrying the weight of secrets that had been held too long. "Put down the shovel, miss," he said. His voice was rough like gravel in a coffee can, worn down by decades of silence and sorrow. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help, if it's not already too late." "Who are you?" "Harlon Cade. Most folks call me Harlon." He looked at the smoldering ruins of the barn, and I saw his jaw tighten with barely controlled rage. Old grief and fresh anger mixing together in his weathered face. "I worked for your grandmother for 40 years, managed the farm, kept things running, helped her keep her secrets." He turned back to me, and the sadness in his eyes deepened into something like desperation. "Mercer did this. His men. trying to scare you away before you find out what Opal was really protecting. And what was that? Harlon was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. The embers crackled behind him, painting his face in orange and shadow. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Your great-grandmother didn't die in 1999, Sable. Josephine Whitfield is 89 years old. She's been living underground for 25 years, hidden, protected, waiting. The world tilted beneath my feet. The photograph in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. And she's dying. Harlon continued, his voice cracking. Your grandmother Opal used to bring her food every 3 days. But Opal's been dead for almost a week now. And nobody's been to the bunker since. Josie's down there alone. No food. No water. At her age. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Come inside, miss, Harlon said, reaching out a weathered hand. We need to talk. And you need to know the truth before Vincent Mercer comes back for the rest of it. I looked at the photograph in my hand. The little girl with blonde braids. The fierce old woman with eyes that could see through time. My mother. My great-grandmother. 25 years of secrets buried underground like seeds waiting to bloom. And somewhere beneath the Montana soil, an 89-year-old woman was dying alone in the darkness, waiting for someone to find her. Waiting for me. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my grandmother had left her warning note. The house was quiet around us, wrapped in the kind of deep, rural silence that city people never experience. No sirens, no traffic, no neighbors moving through their lives on the other side of thin walls. Just the creak of old wood settling, the whisper of wind against windows, and the distant hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. Outside, the last embers of the barn glowed faintly, 100 years of history still smoldering into nothing. Harlon held the photograph I had found, studying it with eyes that glistened in the lamplight. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he traced the outline of the two figures in the image. The little girl with blonde braids. The fierce old woman with eyes that could pierce through decades. You found the box, he said finally. Good. Opal was hoping you would. The woman in the photograph, I said. My great-grandmother. She's supposed to be dead. Everyone thinks she died in 1999. Harlon set down the photo and looked at me directly. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. But there was something fierce burning in their depths. Something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken. Josephine Whitfield didn't die in 1999, Sable. She disappeared. He paused, letting the words settle over me like the first flakes of a coming blizzard. Your grandmother helped her fake her own death and has been hiding her ever since. 25 years underground. A quarter century in darkness, waiting for a day that never came. The words hit me like a physical blow. In hiding. 25 years, that was impossible. No one could survive that long hidden away from the world. No one could choose to live like that, buried alive in some underground prison, while life continued above. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would anyone do that? Because the alternative was worse, Harlon said, as if reading my thoughts. He leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face. making him look older than his 70 years, making him look like a man who had carried too many secrets for too long. In 1982, Vincent Mercer's father, William Mercer, wanted this land, wanted to build some fancy resort development. Cabins, golf courses, the whole dream. The kind of project that would make him the richest man in 3 counties. But the Whitfields wouldn't sell. This farm had been in your family for 4 generations. Your great-great-grandfather built this house with his own 2 hands in 1902. Built it from timber he cut himself on land. He cleared with nothing but an axe and determination. They weren't about to hand it over to some developer with dollar signs in his eyes. Harlon's voice hardened. So William Mercer took it. Not directly. He was smarter than that. He paid off a county clerk to forge transfer documents, bribed a judge to validate them in court. Stole 200 acres right out from under your family through paperwork and corruption. Legal theft dressed up in signatures and seals. 200 acres, I repeated. But the lawyer said my grandmother left me 80. That's what's left. The rest was stolen 40 years ago. Harlan's jaw tightened. And when Josie started investigating, started gathering evidence of what the Mercers had done, his voice trailed off, but I could fill in the silence. They threatened her. They told her what would happen to Opal if she didn't stop. Your grandmother was just a young woman then, maybe 25 years old, trying to run this farm alone after her husband died. Trying to raise a daughter. Trying to survive in a world that wanted to crush her. I thought of the figure in the cornfield. The pointing finger. The slow walk into the darkness. But Josie was stubborn. Harlon continued. She kept gathering evidence anyway. Case closed within a week. Harlan's voice was bitter. Amazing how quickly cases close when the right people make the right phone calls. But it wasn't voluntary. Harlon shook his head slowly, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. She made a choice that night. The Mercers told her what would happen if she testified. They said Opal would have an accident, a fatal accident that no one would question. A young woman alone on a remote farm, these things happen. Tragic, but not suspicious. His eyes met mine, and I saw the full depth of the horror. So Josie chose to disappear instead. Let everyone think she was dead, so the Mercers would stop watching, stop threatening, stop waiting for a chance to destroy what was left of her family. She sacrificed her freedom to save her daughter's life. And Opal hid her all these years. In a bunker beneath the old Blackstone quarry about 5 miles from here. I remembered seeing signs for the quarry on our drive in. Abandoned property. Keep out. Danger. Your grandmother built it herself with help from a few people she trusted. Air filtration. Water supply. Everything Josie needed to survive underground. Opal visited every 3 days with food and supplies. Kept her mother alive in the darkness while the whole world thought she was dead. 25 years. I tried to imagine it. A quarter century without sunlight. Without fresh air. Without the simple pleasure of walking outside and feeling rain on your face. 25 years in a concrete tomb, sustained only by the visits of a daughter who was growing old herself. But Opal died 6 days ago. I said slowly, the terrible truth dawning. That means Harlon nodded grimly. Your great-grandmother is 89 years old. She's been alone underground without food or water for nearly a week. And if we don't find her soon, Sable, she's gonna die down there for real this time. The note. The kind of slow poison that might cause an old woman to have a heart attack, and no one would ask questions. My blood ran cold. Mercer. We can't prove it. Not yet. But Opal switched to bottled water after that, started being more careful about everything. She knew they were coming for her. His voice broke slightly. She just didn't know how soon. I looked at the velvet box in my hands. The key. The coordinates. The photograph of a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her family. We have to find her, I said. Right now. Tonight. The coordinates on that key will get us close, but not all the way. Opal split the map in two for safety. She kept one half hidden here. The other half she gave to a man she trusted completely. Who? Frank Carver. A private investigator who spent years helping Opal track the Mercers, documenting their crimes, building a case that would survive anything. Harlon paused. He died 5 years ago, but his wife Edna is still alive. She's in a nursing home in Cedar Falls, about 3 hours from here. If anyone knows where that second half of the map is, it's her. 3 hours there. 3 hours back. 6 hours round trip, while an 89-year-old woman waited in darkness without food or water. Then we leave now, I said. We left before Clyde woke up. I didn't tell him where I was going. After everything Harlon had revealed, after learning about the poisoned well and the decades of threats and the corruption that ran through this county like rot through old wood, I wasn't sure I could trust my stepfather anymore. Something about the way he had latched on to Vincent Mercer's offer, the eagerness in his voice when he heard that number. $300,000. His eyes had lit up like Christmas morning. Harlan's old pickup truck rattled down the highway as the sun rose over the mountains. The landscape transformed in the early light. Shadows receded from the valleys. Pine forests glowed golden at their edges. The distant peaks caught fire with the first rays of dawn. I held the velvet box in my lap, turning the key over and over in my fingers, thinking about everything I had learned. Tell me about her, I said finally. My grandmother. What was she like? Harlon smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen from him since we met. It transformed his weathered face, made him look younger somehow. Made him look like a man who had known happiness once, even if that happiness was buried now under years of grief. Opal was fierce, he said. Stubborn as a mule and twice as smart. She could argue with a fence post and win. Make her point so thoroughly that you'd walk away wondering how you'd ever believed anything different. He glanced at me, his eyes softening. But she had a heart bigger than all of Montana. Took care of everyone whether they deserved it or not. Helped neighbors who'd never done a thing for her. Fed stray animals that wandered onto the property. Treated every living thing like it mattered. She talked about your mother constantly, he continued. Corinne. She missed her every single day for 23 years. She understood why your mother left. Understood it was the only way to keep you safe from people who would use you to hurt this family. But it broke her heart. Every day it broke her heart a little more. She wrote letters, I said quietly. I found some of them. Never sent. Harlon nodded. She used to write to your mother constantly. Hundreds of them over the years. Never mailed a single one. She was afraid they would be intercepted, that the Mercers would use them to find Corinne and destroy the life she had built. A crack formed in the wall I had built around my grief. My mother knew, I said. She knew her grandmother was still alive. She knew about all of this. Opal told her the truth before she left, made her promise never to come back, never to try to contact them, never to do anything that might draw the Mercers' attention. Corinne kept that promise for 23 years, even when it meant never seeing her family again. But she died without ever coming home. Yes. Harlan's voice was thick with old grief. That's the cruelest part. Opal got word about Corinne's illness too late. By the time she tried to reach out, your mother was already gone. Opal never got to say goodbye. Never got to hold her daughter's hand one last time. Never got to tell her that everything she had sacrificed was worth it. I stared out the window at the passing fields, my throat tight with grief and anger, and something that felt almost like hope. 23 years of silence. 23 years of sacrifice. And in the end, none of them got the reunion they deserved. But my great-grandmother was still alive. Somewhere underground, waiting for someone to find her. And I was not gonna let her die alone in the darkness. The Golden Pines nursing home was a low brick building surrounded by carefully manicured lawns and flowering gardens. It looked peaceful, pleasant. The kind of place where elderly people went to live out their final days in quiet comfort. The kind of place where secrets went to be forgotten. The nurse at the front desk frowned when I asked to see Edna Carver. She's in the memory care unit, the nurse said, her voice carrying the tired patience of someone who had this conversation many times before. She doesn't get many visitors. Are you family? Yes, I said. The lie came easier than I expected. I'm her great-niece. We haven't seen each other in years. The nurse gave me a skeptical look, but buzzed me through anyway. Room 112. Down the hall to the left. Don't be alarmed if she doesn't recognize you. She has good days and bad days. Edna Carver was tiny, barely bigger than a child lost in a bed that seemed to swallow her whole. Her hair was white and wispy, floating around her head like dandelion fluff. Her skin was papery and translucent, marked with the brown spots of extreme age. Her hands rested on the blanket, thin as bird bones, fragile as dried flowers. Her eyes were closed when I entered, and for a moment I thought she was asleep. Or worse. Then she spoke. "Frank, is that you, dear?" Her voice was thin, distant like an echo from very far away, like someone calling across a canyon. "No, ma'am," I said gently, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "My name is Sable Westcott. I'm Opal Whitfield's granddaughter." Her eyes opened slowly. They were cloudy with cataracts, but something flickered in their depths when she heard my grandmother's name. Recognition. Memory. And behind that fear, Opal, she whispered. Opal is in trouble. The bad men are coming for her. The bad men already came, Mrs. Carver. Opal died last week. But there's someone else who needs help now. Josie Whitfield. Your husband Frank helped hide her, helped keep her safe. I leaned closer. I need to find the map he kept, the one that shows where she's hiding. Edna's face crinkled with confusion. Her eyes drifted unfocused, looking at something I couldn't see. Memories, perhaps. Ghosts of a life that was fading like old photographs. Then, slowly, painfully, understanding returned to her gaze. Frank kept the secrets in the spine, she murmured. The spine of the world. Atlas. He holds up everything. I looked around the room. There was a small bookshelf in the corner. Mostly romance novels with faded covers and crossword puzzle books with half-completed grids. But on the bottom shelf, I spotted something different. A large, heavy book with a leather cover, its spine cracked with age. Atlas of the World, 1995 edition. I pulled it from the shelf. It was surprisingly heavy, the spine thick and stiff with age. I ran my fingers along the binding and felt something strange, a lump in the leather that shouldn't be there. Something hidden inside. I used my pocket knife to carefully slice through the old glue, working slowly, so as not to damage whatever lay beneath. A piece of paper slid out into my hands. It was translucent, like architectural vellum covered with lines and notations and topographical marks. And in the corner, a red X that marked a specific location. But it was only half a drawing. The edges were torn jagged, meant to match another piece. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photograph I had taken of the markings on the masking tape. Lines I hadn't understood before. Now I saw them clearly. Contours that matched the ones on the paper in my hands. I held them together, aligning the torn edges. The complete map showed the Blackstone Quarry. The red X marked a location deep inside the old ventilation system. A place no one had visited in decades. A place where an 89-year-old woman had been hiding for 25 years. I know what you're looking for. Meet me at the bakery on Main Street. Come alone. Dorothy Saunders, the woman Harlon had mentioned who owned the bakery in town, who had known my grandmother since childhood, who had helped keep the secrets all these years. Change of plans, I told Harlon. Drop me in town. There's someone I need to see. The Ridgewood Bakery was a small building on Main Street, squeezed between a hardware store and an empty storefront with faded for lease signs in the dusty windows. The smell hit me the moment I opened the door. Fresh bread and cinnamon and something sweet that made my stomach growl despite everything. The aroma of comfort, of home, of things baked with love by hands that had been doing this work for decades. Dorothy Saunders was waiting behind the counter. She was tall and thin, maybe 75 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her apron was dusted with flour. But there was steel beneath that grandmotherly exterior. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze. "Close the door," she said, and flipped the sign to closed. "Sit down. We don't have much time." I did as she asked, my heart pounding. Vincent Mercer has been watching everyone who gets close to you. He knows you went to Cedar Falls today. He knows you found something. How do you know all this? Dorothy's smile was thin and humorless. Because I've been watching him for 40 years. Your grandmother and I grew up together. Best friends from the time we could walk. When the Mercers stole her family's land, I was there. When her mother disappeared, I helped Opal pick up the pieces. And when Opal decided to hide Josie away from the world, I was one of the only people she trusted with the truth. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I know where Josie is. I've known since 1999, and I know that without food or water for almost a week, she doesn't have much time left. Then help me get to her. Tell me how to get into the quarry. The main entrance is guarded. Mercer has men there around the clock ever since Opal died. He's afraid of what you might find. But there's another way in. Dorothy pulled a piece of paper from her apron pocket and slid it across the table. Detailed directions, a description of where to find a hidden shaft, warnings about the rusted ladder and the flooded passages below. An air intake shaft on the north side of the property, hidden in the brush about 100 yards past the old equipment shed. It drops straight down into the old ventilation system. That's how Opal used to get in. That's how you'll get in tonight. Tonight. You can't wait any longer. Every hour you delay is an hour Josie might not survive. Dorothy reached under the counter and pulled out an old tin box, rusted at the edges and dented from years of handling. The kind of box that held things too precious to throw away, but too painful to look at often. Opal gave me this 3 months ago. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you got it. I opened the box carefully, my fingers brushing against cold metal. Inside were letters, hundreds of them. Bundled together with faded ribbon, the paper yellowed with age. All addressed to the same person. Corinne Whitfield, Chicago, Illinois. All marked with the same red stamp. Return to sender. Address unknown. She wrote to your mother, Dorothy said softly. Every month for 20 years. Every single letter came back unopened. Your mother moved so many times, changed her name when she got married. Did everything she could to stay hidden and safe. Opal never stopped trying to reach her. Never stopped hoping. I picked up one of the letters, unfolded it slowly, afraid the paper might crumble between my fingers. My dearest Corinne, I saw a girl on the street today who reminded me of you. Same golden hair. Same stubborn way of walking like she owned the world and dared anyone to tell her different. For just a moment, I let myself believe it was you. That you had finally come home to me. But when she turned around, she was a stranger. Just another stranger in a world full of them. I miss you every single day. I miss the sound of your laugh echoing through this old house. I miss the way you used to curl up on the porch swing with a book bigger than your head. I miss the smell of your hair when I held you close. I know why you left. I know it was the only way to keep Sable safe. But some days the knowing doesn't make it hurt any less. I am keeping your grandmother safe. She is stronger than anyone knows. She asks about you constantly. She wants to meet Sable more than anything in this world. Maybe someday when all of this is finally over, we can be a family again. Until then, know that you are loved. Always and forever. Your mother, Opal. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. All those years, all those letters, all that love poured onto paper and sent out into the void, hoping against hope that somehow it would find its way home. And my mother had never received a single one. She loved you all so much, Dorothy said quietly, and she never stopped hoping, not until the very end. I closed the tin box and held it against my chest. This fragile container of 20 years of longing. Thank you, I managed, for keeping these safe, for keeping all of them safe. Dorothy nodded slowly. Now go find Josie, bring her home, and make the Mercers pay for every tear they've caused this family. I returned to the farmhouse as the sun began to set. The sky was bleeding red and orange over the mountains, beautiful and brutal at the same time. The kind of sunset that made you feel small. The kind that reminded you how brief a human life was, compared to the endless cycles of the earth. Clyde was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. The letters were spread out before him. The tin box sat open empty now, its contents scattered across the wooden surface like fallen leaves. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was pale. He had been crying. She loved her so much, he said without looking up. His voice was raw, scraped clean of everything but grief. Your grandmother. She loved Corinne so much, and your mother never even knew. All those years, all those letters. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. I found them this morning after you left. Couldn't stop reading. Couldn't stop. His voice broke. I stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. This was the most emotion I had ever seen from Clyde. The most human he had ever seemed. For 6 months he had been a shadow in my life. A presence without substance. A man who shared my living space, but not my grief. Now he looked broken. I made a mistake, Sable. A terrible mistake. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the fields that were just beginning to darken with twilight. Mercer came to me 6 months ago, when your mother was sick, when the medical bills were drowning us, when I didn't know how we were going to survive. My stomach dropped. I had suspected something. The eagerness in his voice when Mercer made his offer. The way he had pushed for the quick sale. But hearing him admit it was something else entirely. He offered money. $50,000. More than I'd ever seen at once in my life. And you took it. I took it. He bowed his head, shoulders slumping with the weight of his confession. I took it because I was scared and desperate and drowning in debt. I didn't understand what this place meant. What it had cost your family to protect it. All I had to do was convince you to sell the farm when the time came. Just sign some papers and walk away. He made it sound so simple, so harmless. I should have been angry. Part of me was angry. White-hot fury that burned in my chest like the embers of the barn still smoldering in the darkness outside. But looking at this broken man, this man who had married my mother and watched her die, who had tried to raise a stepdaughter he barely knew how to talk to, I felt something else too. Something like understanding. My mother had chosen Clyde, had loved him enough to marry him, had trusted him to take care of me after she was gone. She must have seen something good in him, something worth saving. I can't undo what I did, Clyde said. But I know people. A friend from college who works for the FBI. If you're going to fight Mercer, you're going to need help. Help that goes beyond what a 17-year-old girl and an old farmer can provide. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Determination. Purpose. The first spark of the man my mother must have fallen in love with. Let me help. Please. It's the least I can do for Corinne. I thought about it for a long moment. The weight of everything pressing down on me. The danger. The urgency. The fact that somewhere underground, my great-grandmother was running out of time. Make your calls, I said finally. But we have to move tonight. Josie is 89 years old. She's been alone in the darkness for nearly a week without food or water. Every hour I delay is an hour she might not survive. I'll have them here by morning, Clyde said. I promise you that. Morning might be too late. I looked out the window at the last light fading from the sky. The stars were beginning to appear one by one, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere beneath this beautiful Montana landscape, an old woman was waiting. Waiting to be found. Waiting to be saved. Waiting to finally come home after 25 years in the dark. Harlon, I said, turning to the old man who had followed me inside. How long will it take us to reach the air shaft? 20 minutes by truck. Another 30 on foot through rough terrain. Then we leave in 1 hour. As soon as it's fully dark. The quarry will be dangerous at night. Flooded tunnels, rusted equipment, Mercer's guards. I know. You could die down there. I know that too. Harlon studied me for a long moment. Whatever he saw in my face seemed to satisfy him. He nodded slowly, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. You're a Whitfield, all right. Stubborn as the rest of them. I looked down at the letters spread across the kitchen table. 20 years of love and longing written in my grandmother's careful hand. 20 years of hoping for a reunion that never came. My mother had kept her promise. She had stayed away to keep me safe. She had died without ever seeing her family again, without ever knowing how much they had sacrificed to protect her. But I was here now, and I was going to bring my great-grandmother home. The darkness was complete when we reached the quarry. No moon tonight. Just stars and shadows and the cold mountain wind that cut through my jacket like it wasn't there. The old fence loomed before us, chain-link topped with rusted barbed wire. Warning signs faded to illegibility by decades of weather. We had parked Harlan's truck half a mile back, hidden in a grove of pines, where it couldn't be seen from the road. The walk had been slow, careful, avoiding the main paths where Mercer's guards might patrol. There, Harlon whispered, pointing to a concrete cylinder jutting up from the ground. It was hidden beneath a tangle of weeds and overgrown bushes, barely visible, even when you knew what you were looking for. The air intake shaft, just like Dorothy said. The heavy iron grate on top had rusted nearly through. Together we heaved it aside, the metal groaning in protest. A smell rose from the darkness below. Damp earth, stale air, and something else. something that reminded me of old libraries and forgotten places where time had stopped moving. I clicked on my flashlight and pointed it down. The beam barely penetrated the blackness. All I could see was the first few rungs of a ladder, ancient and corroded, descending into nothing. 50 feet down, Harlon said, then a catwalk that leads to the main tunnel system. The bunker is another quarter-mile in past the old crusher unit. You've been down there before. Twice. Years ago when Opal needed help moving supplies. He paused. It's a maze down there, Sable. Easy to get lost. Easy to get hurt. I have the map. Maps don't show everything. Water levels change. Tunnels collapse. What was passable last year might be a death trap now. I looked into the darkness, felt it looking back at me. Cold, patient, hungry. She's down there, I said. She's been waiting 25 years for someone to bring her home. I'm not going to let her die alone. Harlon was quiet for a moment. Then he put his weathered hand on my shoulder. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Your mother, too. I didn't trust myself to respond. Instead, I grabbed the first rung of the ladder and began my descent. Into the darkness. Into the unknown. Into the buried heart of a secret that had been hidden for a quarter century. And toward a woman who had sacrificed everything. Her freedom, her life, her place in the world to protect the family she loved. I was coming for her. And nothing, not Mercer's guards, not the flooded tunnels, not the darkness itself was going to stop me. The ladder groaned beneath my weight with each step down. Rust flaked off under my fingers. The air grew colder, damper, heavier with each foot I descended. Above me, the circle of stars grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a pinprick of light in an ocean of black. 50 feet down, my boots touched metal. The catwalk. I swept my flashlight beam across the space and felt my breath catch in my throat. The quarry stretched out before me, vast and terrible, a cathedral of stone carved by decades of human industry, and then abandoned to the darkness. Black water filled the lower levels, still and silent as a mirror. Rusted machinery loomed in the shadows like the skeletons of prehistoric beasts. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with a rhythm like a heartbeat. And somewhere in this maze of tunnels and shadows, my great-grandmother was waiting. I checked my map, oriented myself, took a deep breath, and started walking. The catwalk groaned beneath my feet with every step. Rusted metal, corroded bolts. Decades of neglect had turned what was once a sturdy industrial walkway into something that felt like it might collapse at any moment. I moved slowly, testing each section, before putting my full weight on it, my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the absolute darkness. Below me, black water stretched in every direction, still as glass, deep as death. The flooded lower levels of the quarry held whatever had been abandoned here when the mine closed 30 years ago. Machinery, tools, perhaps even the bodies of the 3 men who had died in the collapse of 1989. I tried not to think about what might be lurking beneath that mirror-dark surface. Harlon followed behind me, his breathing heavy but steady. 70 years old, bad knees, weathered joints that probably screamed with every movement. But he hadn't hesitated, hadn't complained. 40 years of loyalty to my family had brought him here into the darkness to help me find a woman he had helped hide for a quarter century. According to the map, we needed to reach the old crusher unit, a massive machine that had once processed tons of limestone every day, reducing boulders to gravel. The entrance to the bunker was hidden behind it, built into the rock wall where no one would think to look. The sounds of the quarry pressed in around us, water dripping from unseen cracks, the distant groan of settling stone, and somewhere ahead, echoing through the tunnels, voices. I froze. Harlon's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. A warning, a signal for silence. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom maybe 50 yards away. 2 of them moving along a parallel catwalk. I could see the silhouettes of men. Mercer's guards. They were searching. "Check Section 3 again." One of them called out, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Boss wants every inch of this place covered." "This is stupid," the other replied. "Nobody's been down here in years. Just do what you're told. And remember, if you find anyone, call it in. Don't try to handle it yourself." The flashlight beams swept in our direction. I pressed myself against a rusted support beam, feeling the cold metal through my jacket. Held my breath. Watched the light pass inches from my hiding spot. Then the voices faded. The footsteps moved away. The darkness returned. "They know someone got in," Harlon breathed. "They're looking for the same areas we need to pass through. Then we find another way." I studied the map in the dim glow of my flashlight, looking for alternatives. There. A side passage that wound through abandoned machinery and half-collapsed tunnels. It connected to Section 4, though the path was longer and more dangerous. But it would get us there, without running into Mercer's men. "This way," I whispered. We moved off the main catwalk onto a narrower passage. The metal here was even more corroded, the structure more precarious. Water dripped from the ceiling, making the surface slick with algae. Twice I nearly lost my footing and had to grab rusted pipes to keep from falling into the black water below. The tunnel wound deeper into the quarry, past mountains of rubble where the ceiling had partially collapsed, past machinery frozen mid-operation, abandoned so quickly that tools still hung from their hooks, past doors marked with faded warning signs I couldn't read in the darkness. 20 minutes later, the crusher unit loomed before us. It was massive, a cathedral of rusted steel and broken conveyor belts. The machine that had once been the heart of this operation, processing the limestone that built half the towns in Montana. Now it sat silent, covered in decades of dust and cobwebs, a monument to the industry that had created and abandoned this place. "Behind there," Harlon whispered, pointing to the rock wall beyond the crusher. "That's where Opal built the entrance." We circled the massive machine, stepping over debris, ducking under collapsed beams. And there, set into the stone like it had always been, there was a door. A circular steel door like something from a submarine. Heavy, industrial, designed to withstand immense pressure and keep secrets for decades. There was a wheel in the center for opening it, and below that a keyhole. I pulled out the old iron key from the velvet box. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. The lock was old, corroded by years of disuse. I could feel the mechanism resisting, fighting against time and rust. Then I remembered what Harlon had told me about the old tractor on my grandmother's farm. Don't force it. Feel the mechanism. Work with it, not against it. I jiggled the key, gently felt the tumblers shift inside the ancient lock. Heard a click. The wheel turned smoothly despite the rust. The door swung open with a groan of metal on metal, releasing a rush of stale air that had been trapped for days. Beyond was a living space frozen in time. A small room, maybe 15 feet by 15 feet, carved into the rock itself. A narrow cot against one wall, blankets rumpled like someone had just risen from sleep. A tiny kitchen area with a camp stove and empty food containers. A bookshelf lined with worn paperbacks, their spines cracked from countless readings. A small table with a lamp and a half-finished crossword puzzle. And covering every inch of available wall space, floor to ceiling, were drawings. Thousands of them. Drawings of a little girl with blonde braids running through fields of golden wheat. Drawings of a farmhouse with a weeping willow in the yard, its branches swaying in an imagined breeze. Drawings of a family gathered around a dinner table laughing happy together, a world that existed only in memory and hope. Drawings of me. Not as I was now, of course, but as my grandmother must have described me during her visits over the years. As a baby taking her first steps, arms outstretched towards someone just outside the frame. As a toddler blowing out birthday candles, face lit with wonder. As a child on the first day of school, backpack too big for her small shoulders. As a teenager with my mother's eyes and my grandmother's determined jaw, each image more detailed than the last. Each one radiating a love that had survived decades of darkness and isolation. Each one proof that even in this underground prison, my great-grandmother had never stopped thinking about the family she had sacrificed everything to protect. And on the narrow cot wrapped in thin blankets that couldn't possibly keep out the underground cold, lay an old woman. She was frail. So frail it hurt to look at her. White hair spread across the pillow like a halo, skin pale and almost translucent, marked with the brown spots of extreme age. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, each one seeming to take enormous effort. For one terrible moment, I thought we were too late. That I had come all this way, uncovered all these secrets, only to find her already gone. That death had claimed her while I was still climbing down rusted ladders and navigating flooded tunnels. That the darkness had won after all. Then her eyes opened. They were blue, the same shade as my mother's eyes, the same shade as mine. You came. Josie Whitfield whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. She said you would come. My opal said you would find me. 89 years old, 25 years in hiding, nearly a week without food or water. And the first words she spoke were not a question, not a complaint, not a cry for help, just quiet certainty. You came. As though she had never doubted it for a single moment. I knelt beside her bed, a wall inside me finally crumbling. Tears I had been holding back since the phone call 3 days ago finally spilled down my cheeks. I'm Sable, I said. Corinne's daughter. Your great-great-granddaughter. Josie smiled. And despite her weakness, despite the years of isolation and sacrifice, that smile transformed her face. Made her look younger somehow. Made her look like the fierce woman in the old photographs. The one who had defied an empire to protect her family. "I know who you are," she said. "I've been watching you grow up through Opal's stories for 17 years. Her hand trembled as she reached toward my face. I took it gently, feeling how fragile her bones were, how thin her skin, how much strength it must have taken for her to survive this long. She told me everything. Your favorite color is blue. You broke your arm falling off a bicycle when you were 8. Your mother sang you to sleep every night until you were too old to admit you still wanted her to." Her voice was growing stronger. Not much, but enough. The spark of life returning as hope flooded back into her. "I have so much to tell you. So much you need to know. But first, you need to see what I've kept safe all these years." She pointed with her free hand to a metal box beneath her cot. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were documents, dozens of them, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves despite the damp conditions. Contracts with signatures that had clearly been forged, the handwriting different from the names they claimed to represent. Photographs of secret meetings between William Mercer and county officials, their faces clearly visible. Letters detailing bribes paid and threats made. Bank records showing suspicious transfers. And at the bottom of the stack, an old cassette tape with a handwritten label. August 15th, 1999. "That tape is a recording of William Mercer admitting everything," Josie said. "I made it myself with a recorder hidden in my purse the night before I was supposed to testify. It's the reason I've stayed hidden all these years. As long as I have that tape, as long as I'm alive to authenticate it, the Mercers can never completely bury the truth." "We need to get you out of here," I said. "Get you somewhere safe. Get you medical attention. You've been without food and water for days." "There's no time to be gentle," Josie said, struggling to sit up. Despite her weakness, despite everything her body had endured, I could see the iron will that had kept her alive for 89 years. "If you found this place, Mercer's men won't be far behind. We need to move now." That was when we heard the footsteps on the catwalk outside. Heavy boots moving fast, voices echoing through the tunnels. Flashlight beams sweeping through the darkness beyond the open door. Mercer's guards had found us. "Take the box," Josie commanded, her voice suddenly fierce. "The evidence has to survive, no matter what happens to me." "I'm not leaving you." I didn't say leave me. Despite everything, a spark of stubborn fire lit in her blue eyes. "There's an emergency system in this bunker. Opal had it installed years ago in case we were ever discovered." She pointed to a panel on the wall. A red button recessed behind a protective cover marked with a single word: "Purge." "Your grandmother was an engineer before she was a farmer," Josie said. "She built in a fail-safe. That button opens the drainage valves. The whole outer chamber will flood and the pressure will force the elevator shaft in the corner to rise to the surface. It's hydraulic, automatic. Our only way out." I looked where she pointed. In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind the bookshelf, was a small metal cage. An elevator barely big enough for 3 people connected to a shaft that disappeared upward into the rock. "If we flood the chamber," I said, "Mercer's men won't be able to follow us." "No, but we'll only have a few minutes to get in the elevator before the water reaches us. And once we're at the surface, she met my eyes, blue to blue, the same determination passing between us like an electrical current. Vincent will be waiting. He'll have heard the alarm. Then we need a plan. I pulled out my phone. No signal this deep underground, but the camera still worked. I hit record. My name is Sable Westcott. If you're watching this, I might already be dead. I recorded everything. The bunker. The drawings on the walls. My great-grandmother lying weak but alive on her narrow cot. The evidence in the metal box. The story of what the Mercer family had done. The Mercer family has been terrorizing this town for over 40 years, I said into the camera. They stole land, destroyed lives, and buried the truth. But the truth is still here. It's been waiting all this time for someone to find it. I turned the camera toward Josie and she nodded, understanding what I needed. My name is Josephine Whitfield, she said, her voice thin but steady. I am 89 years old. I have been hiding in this bunker since 1999 to protect my family from the men who tried to destroy us. And I am ready to tell the world everything. The footsteps outside were getting closer. I could hear voices shouting, coordinating their search. Now, Josie said, press the button. Let's finish this. Harlon helped Josie into the elevator cage while I grabbed the metal box of evidence. The chamber was small, barely enough room for the three of us. The mechanism groaned with disuse, the cables creaking ominously. The sounds of Mercer's men were right outside now. Boots on metal, hands on the submarine door. I ran back to the red button on the wall. Opal always said every system needs an escape route, Josie murmured from the elevator. She built one for me back in 1999. She promised she would get me out one way or another. I pressed the button. A siren began to wail, deafening in the enclosed space. Somewhere deep in the walls, machinery groaned to life for the first time in years. Gears turned. Valves opened. And then I heard it. The sound of rushing water, like a river breaking free of a dam. I sprinted back to the elevator and threw myself inside, pulling the gate shut behind me. Harlon slammed the inner door closed just as water burst through the seals around the blast door. High-pressure jets sprang in every direction. In seconds, it was ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then rising toward my chest as I held Josie above the surface. "Come on," I prayed. "Come on." With a lurch that threw us against the walls, the elevator engaged. The rising water pressure forced the car upward slowly at first, then faster as the hydraulics caught. The cage shuddered and groaned, cables screaming with strain. But something was wrong. The elevator shuddered, groaned, stopped. "It's stuck," Harlon said, his voice tight with fear. "Something's blocking the mechanism." The water was rising faster now, up to my shoulders. Josie was struggling to keep her head above the surface, her frail body fighting against the cold and the current. "Harlon, you have to climb," I shouted over the roar of the water. "Get to the top and clear whatever's blocking it." He didn't hesitate, despite his 70 years, despite his bad knees and weathered joints. Harlon grabbed the cage bars and started climbing, hand over hand, pulling himself up the shaft, while the water rose beneath him. I held Josie against me, her frail body trembling, her breathing shallow. She had survived down here for so long, 25 years in darkness and isolation. I was not going to let her die now, not when we were so close. The water reached my chin. I tilted my head back, gasping for air. Josie's face was barely above the surface. I lifted her higher arms, screaming with the effort, refusing to let go. The water reached my mouth. I took one last breath, and then I heard Harlon's voice from above. "Hold on, I've got it." A grinding sound, metal scraping against metal, something breaking free. And then the elevator lurched upward again, rising through the shaft as the water level finally began to drop below us. We burst through the surface so fast, the elevator car nearly launched into the air. We skidded to a stop on a concrete pad, and I pushed away the gate, gasping for fresh air. The night sky stretched above us, vast and star-filled. The cold Montana wind hit my wet skin like 1,000 needles. But we were alive. We were alive. But we were not alone. Vincent Mercer stood 10 yards away. His silver hair was disheveled. His expensive suit was splattered with mud. His face was twisted with barely controlled rage. The mask of civility he had worn when we first met was gone, completely replaced by something ugly and desperate. "That was quite a show," he said, his voice shaking. "Flooding my quarry, destroying millions of dollars of equipment. All for what? An old woman and some worthless papers. These papers prove your family stole everything you have," I said, holding the metal box against my chest. "Your father was a thief and a forger, and everyone is about to know it." I held up my phone. The video was uploading, streaming live to every social media platform I had. The signal was weak out here, but it was enough. The view counter was climbing. 10,000 people, 20,000, 50,000. The number growing with every passing second. "You're done, Vincent. The whole world is watching." For a moment, his expression flickered between rage and desperation. I could see him calculating, weighing his options, looking for a way out. Then something changed in his eyes, something cold and dangerous. "You think a video matters," he snarled. "I own half the judges in this state. I have lawyers who can bury any evidence you think you have. By morning, this will all be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old woman and a grief-stricken teenager. This isn't over." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night. Not Mercer's men. Different vehicles. Different lights. Federal vehicles. FBI. And standing beside the lead car, looking haggard but determined, was Clyde. "I called them," Clyde said, stepping forward into the light. "Told them everything. About the money Mercer paid me. About the threats against your family. About what his father did 40 years ago." He looked at me, and I saw years of guilt and regret in his eyes. But also something else, something like hope. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you. Failed your mother. But I couldn't let them hurt you. Not when I finally understood what Corinne sacrificed to protect you." The FBI agents began moving toward Vincent. But before they could reach him, another car pulled up. A young man stepped out, maybe 22 years old. The same silver-touched hair as Vincent, but premature rather than aged. The same sharp features, but none of the cruelty in his expression. His face was pale, conflicted, determined. "Father," Vincent's voice cracked with confusion. "Everett, what are you doing here?" Everett Mercer walked past the agents, past Clyde, past Harlon, until he stood directly in front of his father. "I found grandfather's journals," Everett said quietly, "in the safe at home. The ones where he wrote down everything, every bribe, every threat, every forged document. All of it in his own handwriting." Vincent's face went white. "Those were private family records. You had no right. You had no right to steal from these people." Everett's voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling. "You had no right to terrorize them for 40 years. And you had no right to make me inherit your sins without ever telling me the truth." He turned to the FBI agents and held out a leather-bound book. "This is my grandfather's personal journal. Everything the Mercer family did to the Whitfields is documented here in William Mercer's own handwriting. I'm prepared to testify to its authenticity." Vincent lunged toward his son, but the agents caught him, forced him to his knees in the mud. "You're destroying everything I built," Vincent screamed. "Everything our family has worked for. Our family built on lies and stolen land." Everett said, his voice cracking but holding firm. "It deserves to fall." He looked at me across the chaos, and I saw something I recognized in his eyes. The desperate need to make things right, even when it meant burning down everything you thought you knew, even when it meant standing alone against your own blood. "I'm sorry," Everett said, "for everything my family did to yours. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a start." One of the FBI agents approached me as they loaded Vincent into the car. "Miss Westcott, we found something you should know about." One of Mercer's men confessed during questioning. He admitted to surveilling the property for weeks before your arrival. He was the one standing in the cornfield that first night, trying to scare you into leaving. The figure in the darkness, the pointing finger. Not a ghost, not a warning from beyond, just another of Vincent's tactics. Another way to make me feel afraid and alone. But it hadn't worked. None of it had worked. Because I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. I had a family that had been waiting for me my entire life. The agents took Vincent away, still screaming about lawyers and false accusations. His voice faded into the night as the car door slammed shut and the vehicle pulled away. Josie leaned against me, trembling with exhaustion, but alive, so very alive. "It's over," she whispered, looking up at the stars she hadn't seen since 1999. "After all this time, my darling, it's finally over." I put my arm around her, holding her steady against the cool night breeze. "No," I said softly. "It's not over. It's just beginning." 6 months passed. The leaves on the oak trees turned from green to gold, then to bare brown branches reaching toward the winter sky. The air grew cold, smelling of wood smoke and coming snow. Then, slowly, gradually, spring returned to Montana. I stood on the porch of the farmhouse looking out at the fields that had belonged to my family for 4 generations. The porch had been repaired now, new wood replacing the rotted planks, fresh paint covering the weather-worn boards. The house itself had been transformed, painted a warm, buttery yellow, the color Josie said it had been when she was a young bride bringing her husband home for the first time. The 200 acres that had been stolen in 1982 were ours again. The courts had ruled in our favor after Everett Mercer's testimony and his grandfather's damning journals. The evidence was overwhelming, the corruption undeniable. One by one, the officials who had helped the Mercers were exposed, judges removed from the bench, county clerks facing charges. A web of corruption that had strangled this county for 40 years finally being cut apart. Vincent Mercer was facing federal charges, his assets frozen, his company dissolved, his name a symbol of corruption throughout the state. Justice had been slow, but it had been thorough. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Josie making her way through the door. She was stronger now, so much stronger than that night in the bunker when I had thought she might not survive. She walked with just a cane, her steps slow but steady. Her cheeks were pink with color, instead of the deathly pallor of those first days. Her eyes sparkled with life that had been dormant for 25 years. The doctors had been amazed at her recovery. That many years in isolation should have destroyed her completely, they said. Should have broken her mind and her body beyond repair. But Josie Whitfield was made of stubborn stuff. She refused to be written off. She sat down in the porch swing beside me. The same swing my mother had loved as a little girl, where she had curled up with books too big for her small lap and dreamed of adventures she would never take. "You're brooding," Josie said. "I can always tell when you're brooding. You get that little line between your eyebrows, just like Corinne used to." I smiled despite myself. "I'm not brooding, I'm just thinking." "About what?" I looked at the stump where the weeping willow used to stand. We hadn't replaced it yet. Hadn't decided what to plant in its place. The dead wood had been removed, but the ground still bore the memory of what had grown there for so many years. "About Mom," I said. "About how much she would have loved this. Seeing you healthy. Seeing the farm restored. Seeing our family together again." Josie reached over and took my hand. Her grip was stronger every day. "She knows," she said softly. "Wherever she is, my darling, she knows. The love we carry for the people we've lost. It doesn't just disappear when they're gone. It becomes part of us, part of everything we do." She squeezed my fingers gently. "Corinne is here, Sable, in every choice you've made, every sacrifice, every moment of courage. She's been with you all along." We sat in comfortable silence watching the sun sink toward the distant mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep purple that slowly faded into night. The first stars began appearing scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. "I found something," I said finally. "This afternoon, when I was clearing out the roots where the old willow tree used to stand. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a rusted tin box, dented and corroded from decades buried in the earth. The kind of box that held things too precious to throw away, but too fragile to handle often." Josie's eyes widened. What is it? Something Mom left behind. I tilted the box toward the porch light so she could read the words scratched into the metal lid. Time capsule. Corinne Whitfield. Do not open until the year 2000. Josie's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my Lord, I remember this. She was obsessed with the idea of sending messages to the future. She made me help her bury it, swore me to secrecy, said it was the most important thing she'd ever done. Under the willow tree, I said, right where she used to sit when she was little. I opened the box carefully, the rusted hinges protesting with age. Inside was a collection of treasures that only an 8-year-old would find precious. A small cloth doll with yarn hair and button eyes worn soft from years of love. A photograph of 3 generations gathered on this very porch, smiling at the camera. Josie, Opal, and a little girl with blonde braids who would grow up to be my mother. A pressed flower. Its petals faded but miraculously intact, the ghost of purple still visible in its veins. A handful of colorful stones probably collected from the creek that ran along the edge of the property. And a letter, folded into a careful square, written in the round, uneven handwriting of a child. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Dear person who finds this box, my name is Corinne Whitfield. I am 8 years old. I live on a farm in Montana with my mom and my grandma. When I grow up, I'm going to be a veterinarian and take care of all the animals in the world. Or maybe an astronaut. I haven't decided yet. I am burying this box under my favorite tree. It is a weeping willow and it is very big and very old. I like to sit under it and read books and pretend I am in a castle made of green curtains. If you are reading this letter, it means the year 2000 has come. I hope the future is good. I hope there are flying cars and robots. And maybe we have met aliens from space. But mostly, I hope you are happy. I hope you have a family who loves you and a home where you belong. That is what I have, and it is the best thing in the whole world. If you are my son or daughter or grandchild, I want you to know that I love you, even though we haven't met yet. I will love you forever, no matter what happens. Please take care of this place. It is special. It is ours. Love, Corinne Whitfield, age 8, P.S. The best hiding spot for treasure is under the big rock by the creek. But don't tell anyone I told you. My vision blurred with tears I could no longer hold back. Josie was weeping beside me, holding the letter like it was made of something more precious than gold, more precious than anything that had ever existed. She never forgot, Josie said through her tears. Even when she was far away, even when she couldn't come home, this place was always in her heart. I looked out at the fields, at the mountains, at the endless sky now filled with more stars than I had ever seen living in the city. The same stars my mother had looked at as a little girl, dreaming of the future, wondering what kind of person would one day find her message. Mom, I whispered into the darkness. I found it. I found my way home. Clyde came to visit the next morning. He had been coming regularly since the trial ended, spending a few days at a time, slowly rebuilding something that had never really existed between us before. I found him in the side yard, kneeling in the dirt, hands covered in soil. "Daffodils and tulips," he said without looking up. "Your mom's favorites. I thought maybe come spring we'd have something beautiful to look at." He straightened up, wiping dirt from his hands on his jeans. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I know I wasn't the father you deserved, but I'm trying to be better. If you'll let me." I thought about the man who had taken Mercer's money, the man who had been willing to sell my heritage for $50,000. But I also thought about the man who had finally found the courage to make it right, who had called in every favor he had to bring the FBI to that quarry, who had testified against Vincent Mercer despite the danger to himself. "Mom would have wanted us to try," I said finally. Clyde nodded and something eased in his shoulders. A burden set down at last. On Christmas Eve, we had our first real family gathering in the farmhouse. Harlon came with his wife of 43 years, carrying a ham that could have fed a small army. Dorothy brought pies 3 different kinds and spent the evening teaching me her secret recipe for apple filling. Leland Thatcher stopped by with a bottle of wine older than I was. And Clyde was there, helping in the kitchen, laughing at Josie's stories about the old days, belonging in a way he never had before. We gathered around the dinner table, the same table where 4 generations of Whitfields had shared meals and memories. The room was warm with the smell of food and the sound of laughter, and the glow of candles that Josie had insisted on lighting. One for every family member who couldn't be there in person. Before we ate, Josie raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "To the ones who are here, and the ones who are watching from somewhere beyond. To the ones who fought and sacrificed so we could be sitting here tonight. And to the ones still to come, the children and grandchildren who will sit at this table long after we're gone." She looked at me, her eyes catching the candlelight. "To Sable, who brought us home." We raised our glasses. We drank. And outside the window, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the fields in white, making everything new again. Spring came slowly to Montana. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. Then green shoots began to appear, tentative at first, then bolder. The fields that had lain dormant all winter came alive with new growth. On a warm afternoon in early April, we gathered in the front yard where the weeping willow used to stand. Not to mourn what had been lost, but to plant something new. Not another willow, Josie had decided. An oak, strong and sturdy, the kind of tree that will stand for another 100 years. The kind of tree that future generations of Whitfields will sit under and tell stories and dream about what's to come. Harlon and Clyde lowered the young tree into the hole we had dug. Its leaves were just beginning to unfurl, small and tender, and full of promise. A new life taking root where an old one had ended. "Your mother would be proud of you," Josie said softly, standing beside me as we watched. "Everything you've done, everything you've become. She would be so proud." I slipped my arm through hers. This woman who had sacrificed so much of her life to protect her family, who had lived in darkness so her daughter could walk in light, who had never stopped believing that someday, somehow, love would find a way. "I know," I said. "I can feel her every day." in the wind through the grass, in the sunlight on the fields, in the way you smile when you talk about her. Josie squeezed my arm. She's here, darling. She never really left. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. The sky blazed with color, orange and pink and purple and gold. The most beautiful sunset I had ever seen. Josie sat beside me in a rocking chair, a blanket over her lap, humming a song her mother used to sing to her 100 years ago. A melody that had survived through generations passed from mother to daughter, carrying memories across time. The fields stretched out before us, green with new growth, alive with the promise of harvest to come. The oak trees were full of leaves again. Birds sang in the branches, and in the distance I could hear the creek running over the rocks. The same sound that had echoed through this valley for generations. The same sound my mother had heard as a little girl, sitting under her favorite tree, dreaming of the future. "Mom," I said softly, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear. "I made it. I found them. I found my way home." And somehow in the whisper of the wind through the grass, in the gentle creak of the porch swing, in the warmth of the evening air, I could swear I heard her answer. "I know, sweetheart. I always knew you would. Thank you for walking this road with me, for listening to this story, even the parts that were hard to tell. If this journey touched your heart, consider what it means to you. What secrets might be waiting in your own family history? What connections you might still discover if you have the courage to look? Have you ever discovered a secret about your family that changed everything? Have you ever found home in a place you never expected? Have you ever learned that love can survive any darkness, any distance? Any amount of time, your story matters. Your voice matters. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear exactly what you have to say. Every single one of us has a home waiting somewhere. Maybe it's a place we've never been. Maybe it's people we haven't met yet. Maybe it's a version of ourselves we haven't become. But it's out there. And it's worth searching for, no matter how long the journey takes.